Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen.
With me today is abundance teacher and money coach, Jodi Lynn Craven.
This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today.
Jodi Lynn, first of all, welcome back, because it's been a couple of weeks since you've been with us here on the show. And we were talking about some of your adventures while you've been away. But the one thing I will bring in is you had a trip to see friends in the southern part of the U.S. And that part must have been wonderful, just being able to catch up with them.
Yes, it was awesome. We planted a little garden, planted a fruit tree. It was nice.
Beautiful. Yeah. Well, we're glad to have you back. Now, you know me, I would normally take a topic like this and I would try to find some way to come up with clever wording and so forth. This one is so edgy, I'm not even going to try.
Yeah.
Just like not even going to go there. Instead, I'm just going to bring our guest on, let her introduce what it is that she's interested in, what her topic is about, and we'll just go with the flow like we normally go. Because if I try to put any kind of spin on this, it's going to come out crazy. I don't want to be crazy today. I just want to be normal. So we're just going to go with normal.
Yeah.
So her name is Lauren Hayes, and Lauren is in a relatively small minority of the population. She's a swinger, and she advocates a swinging lifestyle. And we've had various kinds of conversations here on the show about sexually related stuff of a wide variety of kinds. I recall we had somebody on who was lived kind of like a free lifestyle, but she didn't self-describe as a swinger. Lauren, I think you're the first actual self-described swinger to be on the program. So
wow,
yeah,
always exciting to be a first.
Yeah. Now there may have been others who didn't own up to it. I don't know, but
right.
I can only go with what they tell me.
Very likely the case.
Yeah, I would think so. So, all right, now this is a pretty unusual lifestyle choice. So, give us a little bit of background on it. How did you end up? In this place?
Yeah, so I want to speak to the swinger thing first, which is so I'm a relationship coach, and I work mostly with ethically non-monogamous couples.
Okay, fair enough.
So the ENM, ethically non-monogamous, is sort of the broad umbrella term for the whole community. And underneath that is polyamorous. I'm going to speak in broad terms, are the polyamorous and swinging. And those are kind of the two models, if you will. Now, there's all kinds of crossover between the communities and all these things. And we all do fall under that ethically non-monogamous umbrella. Mm-hmm. So I work both with polyamorous and swinging couples.
Okay. That's an interesting term too, ethically monogamous.
Ethically non-monogamous.
Non-monogamous, excuse me. Yes,
yeah,
sorry.
ENM is easier to say.
ENM, yes, that's quicker, right? But
it also goes by consensually non-monogamous or just open relationship. It's another term that people will use. And so, to people who don't know anything about ENM, it's just enough to say you're ethically non-monogamous. To other people in the community, then we start talking about what that means to them, and that's one of the things we're going to talk about, is everybody gets to create whatever they want to create in that relationship.
Well, where does the ethically part come into it?
Yes. So the ethically non-monogamous part comes in to say that everyone involved in these situations knows everything that's going on and is consenting.
Okay.
So this is distinct from, some people will get confused and think that when you're in a monogamous relationship and you cheat, that makes you non-monogamous.
Yeah, it doesn't quite work.
It doesn't. No. It's called cheating or an affair. We already have terms for that. So in our world, we usually drop the ethical part of that and just say non-monogamy for that reason, because we already have terms for unethical monogamy. And so this is ethical.
They're a lot less mouthy, yeah.
Yeah. These are just really long terms. But yeah, so we just kind of drop it and call ourselves non-monogamous, knowing that if we call ourselves that, it is the ethical type.
Okay.
Got it.
It's an interesting word to choose, ethical, because what you're suggesting with the use, with that choice of use, is the idea that because people are voluntarily, consciously making a decision to be involved in this kind of activity, that is by definition ethical, which personally I have I kind of have strong empathy for that one. I just know that there are also some other people who would say, no, 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 no. So that's what makes it an interesting choice for me.
Yeah.
And I imagine you kind of get pushback on that sometimes too.
I've never gotten pushback on the term ethical, so I love that you're giving me pushback on that, actually. It's like,
well, this is about as far as I can push back, because I'm like I said, I agree with the term. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be the folks that don't believe that this can be ethical. And I would say that's sort of the people we're not talking to, because they're never going to, I mean, then they can use the other term, consensual non-monogamy, if that makes them feel better. But I would say, between ENM and CNM or open relationship, they're all used pretty regularly.
And how did you end up in this field?
Okay, so how my husband and I ended up in this is it requires a little bit of a backstory. So when this was maybe, gosh, you know how time flies. This was maybe 10, 15 years ago now. A friend of a friend approached me. So I had connected with him at several of her parties. Now, I am a firm believer that men and women can be friends. So that might be my second controversial thing to say today. But, we had connected several times just at parties, and he was like, oh, I'd love to get to know you better. And I was like, yeah, me too. So we met for coffee one day. And he asked me whether I had read a book called Sex at Dawn by Christopher Ryan, which is a popular book in the ENM community, which I have to admit I haven't read, but I know the basis of it. And I said, no, I have not. And then he brought up that he and his wife were polyamorous. And so I said, well, and he thought maybe my husband and I were too. Evidently, I was putting off some kind of vibe. I don't know. Maybe that was foreshadowing. So
either way, it works for me. Either way, I don't care.
Yeah. So I said, no, we're not, but that is fascinating, and I would love to know more about that. So we had our coffee. We talked for over an hour. I asked 100 questions. He answered all of them. And then I went home and told my husband what had happened. And he was, first like, oh, I'm not surprised he was actually hitting on you. Then, he was like, wow, that is fascinating. And then he asked me a bunch of questions. And so I kind of said, now we weren't interested in it at that time. Mm-hmm. We had small children. We were in that exhausted stage of life. And it was not even remotely interesting to me at that time. And I will say it added an energy to our relationship. And it was very exciting that someone was like approaching me and wanted to date me. Mm-hmm. And so this just added a spark. Like my husband and I always had really great sex for like a week. It was just sort of off the charts because this extra energy was added to it. Regardless, we still didn't have interest in actually participating in that at the time. So fast forward to about 6 years ago, and I was just walking through our bedroom very casually one night, and he said, he was working on his laptop, and he's like, I feel like there's just something more. And I don't know how I knew, but I knew he was talking about our relationship. So it kind of stopped me in my tracks, and I was like, what does that mean? And he said, I don't really know. I just feel like there's something else. And I said, do you want a girlfriend? And he's like, I don't think I want a girlfriend. He's like, I really don't know. I just feel like there's something more out there. And so it just started from that conversation. Now, what came up for me in that one conversation were all the things that you would imagine came up for me. Am I not enough? Are we not happy? I'm like, I thought we were really happy. He's like, no, we're really happy. So it was just a very confusing conversation for me. And there are reasons why the way he brought it up was actually very good, but we can get into that later. But what it started was an exploration. I'm going to give you the abbreviated version. So it did create we both started doing some research, like what else is out there. And I was a little like, I don't even know what I'm looking for. So I was looking for sexual retreats for couples and things like that. But most of those things were targeted at couples that were failing, save your marriage and, get the spark back. And we're like, we have so much spark. I don't think we're the
Not
right.
quite the issue. Yeah.
Well, that's not the issue. And when you start searching on these things, you also get swinger resorts and things like that will come up in your search, and articles. So I started reading articles about, travel, people who had just visited some of these resorts and their reports on it and stuff. And so eventually we found the book, The Ethical Slut, which is another, I would almost say like a Bible for the community.
Okay.
It was one of the first. Now there are many books about non-monogamy, including mine by the end of this year, but there weren't a lot, at one time, and they were really the first to have this book. So once we discovered that book, we already had a weekly date night in our calendars, just something we always did. And so we started to talk about one chapter at a time. We would read each chapter for the week and kind of have a little book club about this. And every week we would talk about like what's interesting, what's not interesting, what is sexy, what is not sexy. And, my biggest fear at the time, and actually to this day, is that we would end up wanting different things. But, whatever reason, we stayed interested in the same things and went down the path of swinging. So I would say that our process was pretty quick, like from our first conversation to the first swinger club that we went to was maybe a few months.
Wow. Yeah, that is quick. Yeah, I have trouble just envisioning myself at all in that mental space. So Jodi Lynn will tell you I have a reputation for always knowing exactly what the next question is to ask. And so this is one of those conversations where I could actually have moments where I have to stutter and stop and say, okay, where do I want to go with this? Because it's so far outside of my experience. It's so far.
Yeah, it is far outside most people's experience. And that's sort of one of my, so you said something in the very beginning that I'm an advocate for the swinging community. I don't want that to be misinterpreted that I'm advocating that everyone should be ethically non-monogamous, because I don't feel that way by any means. What I do feel is that I wish more people knew about the community and the options that it provides within relationships. Because here's the thing, and you'll totally get this. We grew up in a monogamous culture. Mm-hmm. We just do monogamy because it's what we know. In fact, we're not even taught very well about how to do monogamy, but it's just what we do. I like people to know about the non-monogamy option. And even if a couple turns to each other and says, wow, that's interesting, but not something that would work for us, not something we're interested in, whatever they say, those people are crazy, whatever they say. Now, monogamy just became a conscious choice.
Sure. Oh, yeah. Once it's part of a conversation, then by definition, it's a conscious choice. Or either way, it's a choice, no matter which choice you're making.
Yes. And my book is very much aimed at everyone, including very much monogamous people, saying, here are the relationship and life lessons that I have learned through non-monogamy that we can all learn and benefit from. And you don't even have to be non-monogamous.
Okay.
Yeah, wow. So that's the basis of that. And because there are a few things that people just, I think they hear non-monogamy and they think that it's just, well, especially here swinging, and it's just sex. And it's, I think there's a lot of great misconception about what that sex looks like. We can get into these misconceptions in a second. And then, oh, sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought on that one. But I did totally lose my train of thought on that one.
That's right. We'll come to your rescue. No problem.
Yeah.
That's all right.
Oh, that's what I know what I was going to say. So really, like, people are attracted to it for a lot of the sexual variety, the sexual fun, fantasy fulfillment is one reason a lot of people will explore in that. Or another actually very popular reason is people who are wanting to explore a bisexual part of themselves, and their partners are in support of that. So the people might be attracted to it for one reason, and then they stay in it for another. For one thing, it is what I call the personal growth journey of most people's lifetime. And so if, people will, maybe think about getting into it, and they will come to me and we'll have all kinds of conversations about that and decide that maybe that's not for them. And people who move forward, everyone agrees. Okay, I don't have stats. I haven't talked to everyone in the ENM community, but clients and friends.
Let's just say a large number. How about
the personal growth that you get from being in this community, and how close that can bring you to your partner when you're doing that personal growth work together is really beautiful, and ultimately what makes the community really special, because everyone's doing that.
That's cool. Yeah. Well, anytime that you have that kind of meeting of the mind, so to speak, where people are on the same page, that kind of commonality is the basis for most friendships, for most personal relationships. There's some kind of commonality going on. So when you have that commonality in that way, of course, it's going to blossom into something along this line. It makes sense.
Yeah. And the friendships are really interesting because we're being vulnerable with each other very early on. The first and probably biggest vulnerability is that most people are doing this secretly. So automatically, when you meet another couple, discretion and privacy are, huge in the community. And so immediately you have to trust people. And immediately you're showing them this vulnerable side of you. They're like, hey, we do this. You do this? Oh, we do this too. And so it's kind of this secret you'll have between you. And then what I often say is that swingers don't talk about the weather. We have very interesting conversations very early on about, different experiences we've had. And also you're having very vulnerable conversations with people about their sexual boundaries, about their, sexual testing, STI testing regimen. You're having conversations with people, after meeting them a few times that you may never have with where monogamous friendships may not go. Just talking about sex for many people is a vulnerable topic.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, even with all of the change that has happened over, say, the last 50 years, where sex is concerned in the wide range of areas of life that implies, even with that, to this day, here in the U.S., no, Jodi Lynn is Canadian, so she can speak to the Canadian viewpoint. But here in the U.S., we're still Puritan dominated. I mean, as much as we have opened up, as much as we have, as much as the 60s happened, well, they happened for 10% of the population. The other 90% were saying, huh? So, it's not something that has had a lot of impact, a lot of positive impact, I would say, across society. But it's not like the old built into the deep ends of the neurospectrum. It's not like that's gone away. And
it's really interesting. I read an article recently in the New York Times that the gist of the article was like, if you want to improve your sex life, the bad news is you're going to have to talk about sex. The bad news? Like what? Because that is such an uncomfortable topic for so many people. And that actually makes me really sad. And also was maybe part of the foreshadowing of a lifestyle that I was meant for, because I've always talked really openly about sex, and my husband and I always talked about it. That's it's getting a little bit hard for me to relate to people who don't want to talk about sex at all. I mean, you don't want to talk about sex with the person that you're having sex with. Yeah. So it's interesting.
Isn't that sad?
Yeah.
It's sad, but I think you're right. I think it's prevalent. I mean, I wouldn't say that it's necessary. I wouldn't know where to assign the proportion of the population or something like that. But let's just say there's a large segment that.
Well, it must be, because the slant of the article was this is the bad news for everybody, that you're going to have to talk about it.
Well, certainly. I mean, the one thing that you can always count on with publications is they're going to write headlines in the way that are the most emotionally distressing, because they have a long history of knowing that whenever they do that, they sell more advertising. So what they're projecting out there is that that's going to get a big response. Now, the interesting question in my mind is, how big of a response does it actually get? And we often don't find that answer out. You have to be, the publisher to find out what the answer to that question is.
Yeah.
But, that's an ongoing thing, and it's actually part of a larger trend. I think we're kind of getting to the point. I've been saying this a few times over the last year about advertising and marketing today, particularly in the digital age. I think we're kind of reaching a point where people are feeling saturated on the negativity.
I think we reached that point long ago.
Well, for many of us, for me, I reached that point around 1995. But I think for the population as a whole, I think the population as a whole is saying enough already.
Yeah.
I mean, it hasn't really translated yet into a significant shift in the way marketing and advertising is done. But you can kind of see, I mean, there is a lot of what they often call fatigue in advertising. The fatigue is growing. And marketers are having to deal with that fatigue. So this goes far beyond just topics about sex. This is about anything that publications go negative on, which is literally everything.
Yeah. But I mean, okay, so that's the interesting paradox in our culture, I think, which is we are puritanical and we're not supposed to talk about sex. And we get sold sex every day.
Yeah.
And so even we were just talking about that reality show, The Secret Lives of the Mormon Wives. That was sold as this show about these the TikTok moms who went, who started swinging. Like when you actually watch the show, no, it's not really true. And that was just
what are they doing? I mean, I haven't seen the show.
Headline. There was a scandal behind it, but that was just the headline to get people to watch a show. And I think it is working.
Apparently. That's Jodi Lynn,
Yeah, I just started watching it yesterday, and it was interesting because I was like, wow, scandalous. Let's watch this.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking last night, because they did like a clip of like what's to come or like whatever. They seem to do that at the end of every single episode.
Yeah.
And so the clip that was to come, they were showing like this girls' night, and it was like, who have you fantasized about? And then there's girls kissing, and it looked like super risque and whatever. And I was like, oh wow, interesting. And then when it got to the episode, it wasn't that at all. Like, it was so interesting that they pushed so hard on that piece. And then it was like, oh, have you ever fantasized about a woman that's in this room? Oh yeah, like, yeah, her. And then they kissed on the cheek, and like that was it. But that's not what it looked like in the clip. It looked like something else was going on. It was so interesting, like you said, that they're selling it in that way.
Yeah, and it's really annoying for us in the community that they actually used swinging as the selling point when they're not representing the swinging community or the ethical non-monogamous community at all.
Well, it's also very descriptive of what happens overall in marketing, because this is one of my pet peeves. I don't spend a lot of time on news because it's not really healthy, but to the extent that I pay attention to it, I look at headlines, and I'm getting to the point where I'm going to stop doing that, because the headlines are almost 95% of the time misleading. Like it's amazing how often you'll see a headline that actually zeroes in on X happened, and you can't find any reference to X in the entire artiple.
Right.
This
I
is a
totally agree. And the articles end up being a disappointment.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And by the way, thank you, headline writers, because you're actually discouraging me from watching news, which is a good thing. So thank you for that. But nevertheless, it's kind of a backward way to go there. But so I mean, I'm sympathetic to what you're talking about when you say how they're kind of overplaying it.
And if people are interested. If people are interested, if you don't mind me mentioning my podcast that we just launched in response to that show, it's called The Examined Lives of the Secret Wives. And we'd actually delve into that. We talk about all the themes that kind of show up in the show around relationships, because I am ultimately a relationship coach, and relationships of all types that are within the show, as well as, the last topic that was a big one was about sex and pleasure. So there is a lot of overlap. There's a really interesting intersection in Utah. That's where I live, between the LDS community and the ethically non-monogamous community, but you'll have to listen to the podcast to.
I would not have known that there was any overlap. That's fascinating that it exists at all.
Yeah, there's actually a very large non-monogamous community in Utah.
Interesting.
Really?
Yes. And it's not the same as polygamy. People get confused by that.
Well, I was just going to say,
polygamy is not actually included in the ethically non-monogamous umbrella.
So it didn't grow out of that. It doesn't have any kind of roots in that at all. That's
absolutely not. No, it's people who have left the church, really, who are part of the community. But
very interesting.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's crazy. Wow. So Jodi Lynn, I mean, we were talking about the American viewpoint, the puritanical viewpoint. Where do the Canadians come in on this?
I think it's the same. We're very polite. Sorry, please. So I think it's even more so here, like something that's really not talked about a whole lot. Yeah, no, I think it'd be very similar.
Okay. Well, that actually is par for the course. I mean, Canada and the U.S. kind of go, we kind of go in parallel on a lot of things. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. It does raise a number of different possible routes, though, because that's one of the things I always do, Lauren, when I'm doing these podcasts. I'm asking myself, what direction do I want to go? And at first, my mind blanked. That's what I was referring to earlier. But now I'm beginning to see different kind of directions to go in. I think one direction I want to go in is the growth, or to what degree is there growth of this? Because from the outside looking in, my perception is that this overall trend, I won't even call it the ENM, just the overall trend about sexual exploration seems to have grown quite a bit. Yeah. I want to know what your perspective is on that.
Yeah. Okay. So one thing that my whole coaching business really is in the foundation of, which is the relationship training I did was Gottman. So everybody knows the Gottman name. And they are the ones who know what make up a healthy relationship. Now, the Gottman training is not for non-monogamous couples per se, but here's the thing that people, I think, lose sight of. Monogamous relationships and non-monogamous relationships are the same in terms of their foundation and the pieces that make up a healthy relationship. Mm-hmm. Where we differ is that I assert through experience and not only my own experience, but other people's experiences, is that we have to be operating at a much healthier level at all times in order to invite the complexity in that we do. Because as you can imagine, non-monogamy is very complex and emotionally complex. Mm-hmm. So it does take a healthy relationship. A lot of people, so here's another misconception, is that, everyone kind of knows that couple, like, oh, they tried to be non-monogamous and they were divorced within 6 months or whatever. So I don't know why this is, but a lot of couples, as a last ditch effort in a failing relationship, will say, well, let's open it up. Let's open our relationship up. Mm-hmm. Like that is actually the worst idea they could possibly have, and probably and usually does. And I never speak in absolutes, because then you always have the one people call up and be like, well, wait, that worked for us. But those people are going to generally speed up the demise of their relationship, because they're trying to fix things, so many things that are broken, with something that isn't ever going to fix anything. Mm-hmm. So that's the biggest question I have for couples when they come to me saying, well, we're kind of interested, but do you think this is right for us? That's one of the first questions, which is, are you trying to fix something in your relationship by doing this? And if so, what is that thing? And let's talk about that thing, because that's the thing you should focus on fixing first. Then you can consider non-monogamy later, but don't do it in order to fix something. Mm-hmm. So most couples ideally coming into non-monogamy, have very healthy relationships. And when I say healthy, they think they have a great relationship. And they're not incorrect. If they think they have a great relationship, they do. But what non-monogamy does is it's kind of like a workout for your relationship.
I would imagine, yeah.
And ultimately, it will shine a light on any patterns or behaviors or unhealthy aspects to your relationship that may not have surfaced before or were there, but you could kind of get by on the day-to-day, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So it will highlight those things. So in non-monogamy, the real commitment, not only to your partner, and we'll talk about partners in a second, is that commitment to that. We are going to acknowledge the cracks in our foundation when they come up, and we're committed to fixing those. And that is why that's one of the benefits that people report from ethical non-monogamy, is feeling so much closer in their primary relationships or in all their relationships if they're polyamorous.
Interesting.
Wow, I did not expect that.
What did you expect? Or can you say? I don't know.
Well, I just thought it was all about sex. I never really thought about it any deeper than that, because I think that's how a lot of people portray it, whether they're like meaning to inside of the community or not. Like, but you just hear things through the grapevine. Oh, this guy I work with, him and his wife are swingers, and like she's got a girlfriend, but he's not allowed one. And like, it's this crazy sex capade that they have. Like, I just never thought about like the deeper things that it would magnify. But it makes total sense, because even thinking about it, there's like insecurities and like, I could never do that. I could never share my partner. I could never. But like, a lot of this stuff is coming from a place of insecurity in myself, or like worry about not being good enough for him, or like all of these other things. Because you're right, it adds so much more complexity to the relationship when you do that.
And that's why I'm saying people really need to feel secure going into it, because their insecurities are going to come up anyway. Exactly. And so that's just like one of the reported benefits. And I think it's interesting when you say that. I think people think about the sex and they stop there. But even in the example you used, if she has a girlfriend, that's likely a deeper relationship than just sex.
Yeah.
And so she now has two relationships that she's managing, or maybe they're all three in, some kind of relationship. That's the thing. And I want to make the distinctions a little more clear. So in polyamory, they are having romantic relationships and loving, falling in love with multiple people. In the swinging community, that is, I would call them deep friendships, and we have a lot of friendships, but we don't go to romantic and falling in love. And so, depending if that couple is polyamorous or swinging, either way, they do have a respectful relationship with that third person. It's not probably just about sex. It might have started out that way, but these are all friendships to some level.
Mm-hmm.
What you're talking about there starts to touch on where my own confusion would come into it. Because for me, any kind of sexual relationship starts with the emotional relationship. I realize that kind of puts me in the minority where many males are concerned.
No, it doesn't.
But it doesn't? Oh, okay. Well, that's nice to know. But the point is that that's where I come from. And so for me, the whole idea of being involved in more than 1, 2, 3, 4, I don't care what the number is, where I have emotional connection, that's incredibly confusing to my mind. I can't divine it. I can't make sense out of it. And I'm impressed that other people can.
Yeah. So that's the other thing I'll say. Like, I think people have this idea that, you go into a swinger club and it's just a bunch of naked bodies and you're expected to jump in and
yeah.
Like, I think this is,
you're not going to see me walking in that club anyway.
I think this is the visual that people have, and this is not at all how the community works. And so I think a lot of people stop right at that vision. So in fact, I mean, the front of so sometimes there's a kind of a front of house and back of house of a swinger club, and the front of the house has a dance floor, a bar, food sometimes. I mean, it looks like any other club. And, people might be dressed a little bit more sexy than a regular club, or there might be a little bit more PDA, but the actual sexual playing we call it playing in our world, is happening in the back of the house. So you're not even like seeing this until you're ready or want to go back there or want to go back. Then you go back with your partner or whomever you're going back with. And there are all kinds of rules and etiquette, you know, you can go in private rooms, you can go where people can watch you. And typically, you know, if you're playing with a couple, you've met them prior. And that's where I'm saying the emotional connection. A lot of people also, even people who are in the community, they say, oh, I'm really strange because I need to have, you know, some emotional connection. I would say that's not strange at all. That's most people. It doesn't mean you have to be in love with the person. It just means you have a connection with them. Mm-hmm. And that is one of my bigger messages, I would say, about non-monogamy, is it highlights the truth about human interaction, which is there are so many levels of connection that you can have with humans, from the cashier at the grocery store to, you know, you have a connection with that person. You say, have a nice day. You maybe had a little interaction. Humans love to connect. It's what we live for. So there are so many levels between, hi, nice to meet you, and I'm in love with you. And these are all the levels that non-monogamy operates in, which monogamy never really taught us are there. We know we kind of learned that there's acquaintance and friendship and maybe best friend and relationship, but there are many levels of connection within friendship even that allow non-monogamy to be an option for people. You don't have to be just in love or friends. Like it's not a black and white proposition.
Okay.
You're choosing the level of connection that you're looking for with people.
Okay. So what you're basically saying to me in my own mind, the way I'm hearing this is, I don't necessarily need to think about this whole conversation in terms of whether or not I could be actively in love with two women at the same time.
Correct.
Think about it rather in terms of what kind of interpersonal relationship would I want to have with those people. And oh, by the way, there could also be a sexual component, which I can at least comprehend that one. Yeah. The other one stretches my mind in too many different directions, and I just can't handle that one. That one I can handle, at least to some degree.
Right. And that's where I'm saying polyamorous couples are going for multiple emotionally committed relationships. Swingers are not. Then there's everything in between, because, by the way, non-monogamous people don't really like to be labeled. So they're always like, well, we lean polyamorous, but we do our own thing. Or we, kind of are swingers, but we do our own. Everyone's doing their own thing. And that's true. That's what I say. So one of the things that I say, and it's all over my website, is non-monogamy can be anything you want it to be, as long as everyone knows about it and everyone is consenting. So that's the beautiful part of choosing non-monogamy. And actually, the beautiful part of choosing monogamy is that every relationship should be a creation between people that really works for them. And that can look like so many different things. I mean, my imagination can't even come up with all the ways that a relationship could look and work between 2 people or 3 people or 4 people or whatever. It's none of my business how it works for them.
I have a weird question.
Great.
Long, weird question. I've noticed, and in my previous, dating life, I've been married for 6 years now. But like watching my husband's, he's got a really good friend and he's younger than us and he's going through dating and, whatever, right? And something that always comes up is he'll be like super upfront with ladies. Like, I'm not looking for a relationship. I'm just looking for a good time. And then they'll be like, oh yeah, I'm just looking for a good time too. Wink, wink, like thinking that they can persuade him or change his mind, or once he gets to know me, whatever. So do you think that because of the depth of vulnerability that you have in that community, like right off the bat, because of the sexual side of things, as well as like the privacy side of things, do you think that is like that problem of people being I don't want to use the word delusional, but I can't think of another word. Let's say delusional or trying to like change people's mind. Do you think because of that vulnerability, that piece doesn't enter into the equation because people have to be really honest with themselves and others? Or do you find that that also enters into?
More the first that you said, that, and this is where it can get very tricky. I have, there are single people in non-monogamy also, and they either date each other or they date outside, and dating over that line is what I call it, into the, so this term is kind of fun. There is, when you are in the swinging world, we call it lifestyle or the lifestyle, which can be confusing to people outside because you're like, what lifestyle are you talking about?
It's helpful
I
to know
think
what the
that's also
nomenclature
because a lot of
are.
people don't like the term swinging.
I mean, it's helpful to know what the terms are, because if you
And
know the
the
terminology, you can
polyamorous folks don't really use that term as much. But I'm going to use a couple of these in this description, so that's what I wanted to say. And then people that are not in the lifestyle or not in ENM at all, we call them vanilla.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's kind of like the muggles. They don't know what's going on. We're hidden in plain sight. Okay, but that can get a little tricky when you're, single and dating outside. And so I would say my general, I don't give advice because I'm a coach, as you can relate. But what I will say is it gets tricky if you try to date, if you are in the lifestyle and you try to date outside of the lifestyle for that reason. And there's two things going on there. People will be very honest about, I'm non-monogamous and this can appeal to people on the outside or not. And that person may say that's appealing to them only because they're interested in that person. The honesty with oneself and others cannot be overstated in how important that is. And it can be tricky to be honest with oneself, as we know.
Yes.
And so that is what creates a lot of the complexity. But in general, so I will know people. So like I mentioned, the sexual fantasy will be a reason that people will sort of start exploring non-monogamy. So let's say they want to have a threesome. Very, very common. So they tell me, well, we just go to clubs and we try to find another woman, or we go to clubs and just try to find another guy. And I'm like, yeah, your chances are so slim. And you might really offend some people in the process, which is fine. We are what we are. But if you're doing this within the community, there are sort of guardrails and things that are known about everybody's expectations. Now, you still have to ask a lot of questions, like I mentioned before, like, how do you guys operate? What are your boundaries? Like all these things. But there is like a platform of understanding, if you will, if you're already part of lifestyle. That makes sense.
Wow.
Totally. Yeah.
Well, it makes sense in that if you're going to have a community, in order to describe it as a community accurately, the community has to have its own norms. I mean, otherwise it's not a community.
Right. Right.
So from that point of view, it makes total sense.
Yeah.
The challenge, it strikes me that actually there's two challenges where this particular community is concerned. One challenge is true for any community, which is trying to define what those norms are. And that's something that I think kind of happens over time. The second one that's involved here, because I think the way you described it was it's kind of like hidden in plain sight, is, okay, how do you know when you're there?
Yeah.
I don't know of a better way to describe that. How do you know when you're part of that mindset that's in that community? And I don't know. Are there clear guidelines on that? Do you know? Is there such a thing as being outside looking in versus inside looking in? I mean, where's the line on that?
I mean, everyone starts, generally speaking, on the outside looking in, because as I mentioned, I don't think I know anybody who has grown up with non-monogamy as kind of part of their world. There are some, obviously, because, this has been a thing for a long time. But so I would say that's a very challenging point. Like when my husband and I started doing the research that I talked about, like we didn't even know what we're looking for. And I would say that's sort of like where a lot of people start. And people will often come to me, they'll, find me and that is one of my roles, is I help people understand the community and find out if that is something they want to do. I'll help them make a plan, because I think when you're entering something like this, you want to take baby steps into it because of the complexity and the emotional complexity and risk that you're taking. And so there are very healthy ways to enter the community, and there are unhealthy ways to enter the community. And I see plenty of relationships that even survive the unhealthy ways, but really, why?
Why?
And, in some ways I would say that my husband and I made a lot of the typical mistakes because we didn't have a coach, but that's part of one my reason I wanted to become one, because, what a different experience that could have been as we kind of, muddled through a lot of experiences.
Mhm.
Different, I can understand, but would it have been substantially different? In other words, you're kind of hinting at the idea that if you'd had a coach, that the experience would have been less painful or less challenging or less difficult or something like that. And the only reason I bring that up is one theme that plays out a lot here on the show for all the different topics that we do is that the best growth happens when we're most challenged, when we're in the most difficult, traumatic, painful situations. So it kind of goes against the grain to say, I mean, and by the way, it doesn't, because I have a lot of respect for all the coaches who appear on the program, because that's what they all do. But it kind of goes against the grain to say, well, I'm going to coach you through it so you don't have to get the bumps along the road. And that's
No, I'm not saying there won't be pain.
Yeah,
that's the thing. There will be discomfort. So there's two things that I tell people you're signing up for if you want to go down this path. You're signing up for discomfort, and you're signing up for awkward. Because this is something, but it's going to be so awkward if I say no, because like you're talking about the polite thing, people recognizing that they're going to have to reject other people is like a big stress point, because like how, I want to be nice and polite. Well, you can reject people and still be nice and polite, but yes, you are going to have to do that. So you're signing up for awkward, you're signing up for discomfort. Now, here's what I will also say, and I think we all know this to be somewhat true in personal growth. A lot of beautiful change can happen in discomfort, and it does happen in discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't happen in trauma.
I like
and
that.
So you have to come out of the trauma and then start healing the trauma. Now, I am not suggesting that if you just jump into ethical non-monogamy, that is going to be a traumatic experience. I'm saying you could have depending, there are lots of situations that someone might get themselves into that might feel a little traumatic to them. And one really big red flag, I would say, is, and this is one of the biggest lessons I would say my husband and I learned, and that I learned, is codependent tendencies are not healthy, and they have no place in non-monogamy. So if you are doing anything within the non-monogamous community only because your partner wants to, that's a recipe for disaster. And so there's a lot. So that's what I mean by it's going to highlight a lot of unhealthy behaviors in your relationship very quickly. And that was one of the ones that it's, one of the chapters of my book. So that is definitely one of the bigger life and relationship lessons that we got out of that. And so, my point about like the growth, being uncomfortable is great. You have to start recognizing like, oh, this is too far in my outside of my comfort zone. And that is a practice in itself. So that is why I always recommend baby steps.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Baby steps, among other things, I would think. I mean, not just baby steps, but also taking steps before you even take the steps of evaluating, is this really something for me? Is this something that I really should be exploring in the first place?
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting because, like I mentioned, the swinger club that we went to. So I have couples who go to a swinger club and they're like, we went and that's not for us. Well, that is one scene in the community. Many people have never been to a swinger club before that are in the community. And so that's another reason a coach can be helpful, to be like, well, there are many different ways to enter the community. You don't have to love a swinger club to be part of it. So, yeah, it's just another, like, you don't know what you don't know, right? So
Mhm.
that's always where the coach can be helpful.
Yeah, that's true. Anytime that you know there's something you don't know, that's absolutely the time to bring a coach in. No doubt
Mhm.
about that. Yeah. I have a couple ways to go. Jodi Lynn, did you have something you wanted to go with?
No, go ahead.
Okay. I think where I want to go is how you navigate, or do you even find yourself having to navigate? Maybe I'm making an assumption here. Well, I'll go with my original question, then I'll let you correct me if needed. How do you navigate those situations where you're dealing with, I'll call them the extreme no. You make contact with somebody, you're proposing some ideas, and you get strong pushback on it. Like, oh no, I would never consider doing something like that.
Well, what is your underlying assumption there?
I'm not sure I have one. I guess the underlying assumption is that could be a very uncomfortable situation for many people.
Yeah.
Having to deal with that level of, really strong boundary going on.
Yeah, so I would say that does play maybe into a misconception that we just meet up and have sex with each other. So typically there's a lot of social, and for every couple, this is different in how much social interaction and connection you're going to have before you end up in a bedroom together. And this is where I was talking about, hopefully long before you get into the bedroom, you're having these conversations, because there are certain boundaries. For example, I'll just throw a couple out there and you can learn a couple new terms. So there is soft swap in this is the swinging community. There's soft swap versus hard swap, full swap. I'm sorry. I just gave you the wrong term. It's full swap. And soft swap is you're not having penetrative sex, but probably everything else. But because everyone's defining everything for themselves, you got to find out what soft swap means to this particular couple. Same with full swap. That generally does mean penetrative sex, but still within that, people are going to have their own boundaries. And so there is so much conversation that should, at least I will say, be happening before you get into a bedroom. And there's also same room, separate room. Some couples swap and like to be in the same room. Some like to be in separate rooms. So if you went with a couple in the bedroom and they're like, oh, we're separate room, oh, we're same room, like that's a complete incompatibility. So these are all things that you have to discuss before you get yourselves into that situation.
So I'm going to say that not only is this a community where you have to really have a good, healthy primary relationship and good, healthy boundaries, but I'm going to take what you said to the nth degree. You got to be willing to talk about everything related. Everything. Like with nothing left unsaid.
Everything.
How did that conversation begin with you and your husband? Because I think without a coach, how would you even, like, I would never have thought of those questions, but like, somebody should ask them those. It's just like you go to this club or you go to this place, and then all of a sudden somebody comes up to you and is like, "Hey, do you like soft or full?"
Yeah.
Or, together or without?
The Ethical Slut, that book was sort of our coach, because that was our reference guide, if you will, into the world, what the menu options were, how to voice. And here's another thing, another chapter of my book: using your voice is a very big life lesson that you're going to come out of lifestyle with, because you have to communicate to your partner your wants. You have to communicate to people that you are just meeting what you want and you don't like. You have to, come up with polite ways to reject people with your voice. I mean, there are so many uses of finding and using your voice that is another benefit from people in the lifestyle, is that there's like a confidence and a trust in themselves. And actually, here's what I'm going to say as maybe, I don't know, our parting comment, that I think knowing, loving, and trusting yourself are probably the biggest things to come out of being part of the ethically non-monogamous community.
I would think it'd be one of the leading things to go into the community in the first place.
If you have it going in, all the better. But I would say most people develop those skills even more when they're in the community.
Okay, but I would think it would be problematic if you didn't have that level of strength going in.
It can be.
I would think that's where you're kind of setting yourself up for all kinds of, I won't necessarily say trauma, but highly painful situations. You did make it pretty clear you're going to be getting into discomfort, you're getting into pain, but we're talking potentially some serious pain if you don't have that really strong level of self.
Yes. That's probably, I mean, and it's kind of like the thing I said about the relationships. Like you might feel like you have a really strong sense of self, and then lifestyle is going to test that, and or that's going to increase for you. And if you don't have it, it's coming your way. Yeah.
In fact, it also occurs to me, one of the topics that is pretty much accepted these days where sexuality is concerned is the idea of couples talking with each other, being communicative. And the reason that's such a big topic is, to a large extent, many couples aren't as communicative as they could be.
Right.
So I mean, like with anything else, we're talking about gradation and degrees, but this particular realm is something where you really need to have a strong background with talking about everything before you can even pursue it, because otherwise that's going to be where you're getting into not just discomfort, you're going to get into like some really
right. And that is
really
the
big stretches.
thing. That's the thing that every couple will say improved the minute they even started talking about getting into non-monogamy is communication. Now, I think communication is also a broad term, and we can go deeper into that, but I don't know about time. But I think what you were just talking about in terms of needing to have that sense of self before going in, what I would actually say, and which I do say all the time, is the most important thing going into lifestyle is just self-awareness. Mm-hmm. So for you to be able to say, I don't have the sense of self. And I do think a lot of people can say that, like, no, that, I'm way too insecure in these areas to even attempt that. Like, people know themselves, and that is great. And when people come to me and they're like, okay, what do we need to like get into ENM? And they're expecting some kind of like physical attribute, or like a very sexual attitude, or, whatever the thing is. But actually my answer is always self-awareness.
Very interesting. Wow. I think we probably could have done quite a bit more than just the hour that we have assigned to doing this show, but we'll bring it to a close there. We do have a couple things we need to do that's part of our regular routine.
Yeah.
First and foremost, for people who are interested in learning more and thinking this is something they want to explore some more, how do they find you? How do they reach out to you?
Probably the easiest place is my website, which is swinginglifestylecoach.com. They can sign up for my newsletter there. All my events will be going on there. And then I'm on socials, on Facebook and Instagram, same name, Swinging Lifestyle Coach. So I'm pretty easy to find. And I have a YouTube channel of the same name.
All right, very good. So second question, this isn't a question, this is more of a thing that I do. But this is something I've been doing for a few years now. And it's interesting. Every time that I'm doing this, I'm finding new ways of seeing it as, wow, this is really important to do. And this is another example of that. Because in order for people to come onto the show, first of all, people who come onto the show are people who are giving in some way. They've gone through something. Maybe it's gone through something traumatic. Maybe they went through something when they were children, whatever. They came out the other side. They found stuff along the way, something they wanted to share. Maybe they wanted to become coaches. They became authors. They created courses. They did all kinds of stuff because they said, this is something that people need to know more about. And in order to do that, of course, they go on to podcasts and they do social media and they write blog posts and they write books and they do all this other kind of stuff. And a lot of it's free content that's out there. And I noticed a few years ago that people who put out these free content, we kind of all, and we do the same thing here because we're putting out free content. We just kind of say, well, yeah, it's going to go out there and hopefully we're helping people and so forth. But we never actually get acknowledged for it. And so that's something I said I can do something about. So Lauren, on behalf of those people you've never met, never seen, never will meet, never will see, who've been consuming your content, who've been hearing what you have to say, who've been reading your stuff, who are going to be reading the book that's going to be coming out sometime soon. On behalf of those people, thank you for what you're doing, because you are performing a very important service to a segment of society that really needs that service.
Wow, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I think it's really important.
Thank you.
And every time I say that, it's always in a different context, a different topic, and so forth. It's amazing to me. It really is true for that one. It really is true for that one. And here it is once again. It really is true for that one. Wow.
Right.
It's so important. So thank you. Yeah, on their behalf and on our behalf, thank you. And then the last thing we always like to do is I have co-hosts like Jodi Lynn who are phenomenal, as you can tell. And they have this, among other things, they have this amazing ability to just kind of take a perspective that I don't have as the host and kind of tie everything together. And I know Jodi Lynn's been thinking about it. That's why I'm kind of going on here a bit. But Jodi Lynn, how are you tying this? This is a challenging one. How are you going to tie this one together? Have you thought about it?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Well, I must say that I am vanilla and that I saw so many or thought so many preconceived things and had so many biases about this community while never being in it, while never really knowing anybody that's been in it. So just the outside kind of looking in. And you've completely changed my perspective, Lauren, and I really appreciate that. And I think that the deeper message that you came with today of it's about growth, not just sex, is true. And I think that this radical vulnerability that you have to have inside of this community, of course, ripples out this tremendous personal growth. I can think of 1,000 things that you would have to become conscious about or self-aware about that you never thought about in your regular, day-to-day lives or your regular relationships. So I'm really excited about your book coming out. I'm really excited about the work that you're doing because I think that being conscious in this way, choosing monogamy or non-monogamy, and even just the self-awareness, the deep self-awareness that you will have from yourself, understanding yourself at this level, on this capacity for individuals being, regardless of what their sex life is and where they want to go next in the bedroom. I think this will cause a tremendous change in our world for the better. So thank you for your work.
Wow. You guys are good.
I tell you, I have great co-hosts.
I'm going to be on cloud 9 the rest of the day. I've never had so much acknowledgement in 5 minutes.
You deserve it.
See, that's one thing you need to know about our rules. Our rules are we like you to feel good here on the show. That's why we call it your daily dose of happiness.
Yeah, I've had the best time. So thank you for having me on.
Well, we're glad that you were here, and thank you for sharing really, really useful and interesting information. I have to admit, like Jodi Lynn, I didn't know what to expect from this conversation. I knew it was going to be far outside of my experience, and that's always kind of cool. I've said before, I find the greatest value from people whose perspectives are totally different from mine. And your perspective is totally different from mine because I've never had that perspective before. Sure enough, I'm learning a whole bunch as a result. So once again, thank you for reinforcing my rule. Yes, I learn the most from the people who have a different perspective from me. So thank you very much. Thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye.